Sure. So President Mbeki will be introducing the theme and also introducing the speaker. I'm sure you might know this, Olive, that former President Thabo Mbeki was one of the head of states then that formulated this union. So the reason why he's introducing the theme, it's because of that.
Yeah. Thank you so much, man. Really do appreciate your time, Stephen. What are you looking forward to? It's 20 years of the African Union. There's a lot to celebrate. There's a lot to also discuss about what we're doing, what we need to do going forward as a continent, right? It is Africa Week in South Africa. We celebrated Africa Day, 2 days ago, when I came to you live for that special broadcast all the way from the University of Limpopo, and we spoke extensively about about what it means to be African and what should be done on African Day. But it's Africa Month, it's Africa Week. This conversation is an ongoing conversation. It's a never-ending conversation. Give us a call, 011-714-2006. We'll take your voice notes very shortly on 0614-104-107. Reflect with us on what this day means to you, but also what you think of the Africa Union 20 years later. Do you think it has achieved much? Do you think it still has any relevance today, right? That is an important question we need to ask ourselves. Our second guest this evening is Collins Mbo. How do I say your surname, Collins? Mbo.
Mbo.
Okay, fantastic, man. Collins is the president of the Nigerian Union in South Africa, and he is also the student of international relations and diplomacy at University of South Africa, UNISA. Collins, obviously, Nigeria and South Africa have come a long way in making sure that the African Union is in existence, right? These are one of the most populous countries on the continent, being Nigeria, but also, the biggest economy on the continent alongside South Africa.
Yeah.
They've played a big role in the African Union's existence and it coming into formation. But a lot of questions are still to be asked about regional stability across the West, across the East, across Southern Africa, and a lot is needs to be asked about African unity altogether, right? And not just unity in the sense of, we're holding hands, but unity in the sense of its translation into policy. We have the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, but there's a lot more to be done. Do you think we've come a long way in the last 20 years as the African Union?
I do believe we've come a long way, and though we still have a lot to do.
Yeah.
I do believe that those who founded the African Union felt that at this point in time we should have gone further than where we are right now. So programs such as this it's a program we should reflect, on what we've done so far, where we are going, and if we are there yet. But if you ask me, I would say that although we've tried to bring Africa together, in trying to develop the continent, but looking at the way we are referred to as the dark continent, I would say that we have a lot to do. I don't see why at this stage we should still be referred to as dark continent, whereas from this continent, all the resources that it's, bringing lights, brightening other continent, other regions of the world are coming from this part of the continent. Then there's a question that why should it be that way? Meaning that African leaders should really do an introspection in trying to utilize our resources, in such a way that it will benefit the continent, not just us right now, but the generations to come. So, like I said, we have tried, but we haven't done the best that we should do, given the resources that we have.
Africa is poised to be the youngest continent in the world, very young continent in terms of its human resource capital and its thinking and ability to solve problems. And our contemporary problems, unique to the world, are ones that young people need to solve. Do you think young people have taken up their charge yet?
Young people haven't taken that charge yet, in the sense that the leaders, if you check the leaders of all the 54 African countries, you find that there are no young people among them. There are no youths there, old people. So the elderly people are not given the youths, the time, the opportunity, to participate in the continent, in trying to build the continent. So I think it's a time where the elderly ones who are there right now should give the younger people the opportunity to also participate in the economy, because in the continent, So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. Really, really do appreciate it. Collins Mbowe, the president of the Nigerian Union South Africa, as well as a student out at UNISA studying diplomacy and international relations. Appreciate your time this evening. Man.
Thank you very much.
Enjoy the lecture. Hopefully we can have a chat again at the end of the lecture and reflect on some of the sentiments coming out of the keynote.
All right, that would be awesome. Thank you very much.
And we're still taking your voice notes, 0614-104-107. Do you believe the African Union in particular is still relevant today? Do you think it has solved the problems that are unique to Africa? I mean, there's a lot of case studies, right? Sudan, South Sudan. There's to be spoken about Mozambique. There's to be spoken about Angola. There's to be spoken about Zimbabwe. I think that's the one that's the thorniest on the continent. There's a lot to be spoken about in relation to the African Union. So give us that call. Let us know if you think it is still relevant and it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. 011-714-2006. Send us that voice note on 0614-104-107. Tweet me at Oliver_speaking, as well as at SAfm Radio across all social media platforms. Right now I'm going to be speaking to Ishmael Yusub. Is Yusub, right? Ishmael Yusub, who's the African Union Student Commission. The African Union Student Commission is, of course, linked to the African Union. And this question of its relevance is important, but also the question about whether young people have taken charge of the continent's story, the continent's future. What do you think? Have we come far in the last 20 years?
Good evening, Oliver, and I owe a debt of gratitude to you for having me on SAfm. And yes, you're correct, it is Ismail Yusuf. I stand as the president of the African Union Student Commission. To answer your question, Oliver, you couldn't be more right. The African Union Student Commission is extremely relevant to the African diaspora. Why? Because most of the population of Africa are youth, right?
Yeah.
And I think that we, the youth, can do a lot in this continent. At the end of the day, you have to realize that if you look at this event that we're in right now, the people here, the majority of the population just here tonight, seem as though they're old and balding.
Yeah.
I think perhaps we may be the youngest here tonight.
Yeah.
And so that shows the representation of the African
continent. The question
continent.
then is, why aren't young people included? Why have we not demanded? And I mean, there are various examples on the African continent where young people have made that demand and say, we will lead, right? Sudan is a good example. Right, when the protest in Sudan happened, it was young people, in particular young women, that led those protests. If we think about 2011, 2012, the Arab Spring, it was young people that made sure that Egypt gets the leadership that reflects their desires and interests. Whether or not it was a good leadership and an effective one is a different question altogether. But why is it that young people are not at the seat of have a seat at the table where the decisions are made?
Well, to answer your question, I would say that action and education go hand in hand. We at the African Union Student Commission pride ourselves on being able to educate the youth in whatever way possible so as to inspire them into action. We know that there is an untapped potential that the youth have, and if we can educate the youth and tap into that potential to go out and do some great things, and then we have some pretty great results.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Ishmael Yusuf. Really, really do appreciate it. Enjoy the lecture this evening, and hopefully we can have a chat again at the end of it.
It would be very, very inspirational to see what the esteemed professor has to say, and I hope we can all, including the youth, take a page out of his book tonight.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you all.
Professor Toyin Falola has written extensively on knowledge production, universities, the production of knowledge, what we typically call epistemology, right? There's been a conversation on the continent about the decolonization of our epistemic crisis. That is to say, the knowledge we produce here, is it truly in itself innately African? Does it solve African problems? Does it speak to the African condition? But it needs to answer the fundamental dialectic first, which is, what is the African condition? Right? And therefore, will flow the conversation around how do we solve for the African condition. We may not have a consensus on what the African condition is, and this is why these lectures, these conventions, these conversations are so critically important. What's your reflection? Has the African Union done a great deal in the last 20 years? Is it still relevant today? 011 714 2006. That's where I'll take your calls. 0614 104 107 for your WhatsApp voice notes. Let's have a listen to some of your WhatsApp voice notes that's come through on the WhatsApp line. Please tell Amanda to check out her WhatsApp. Okay. Also on the program this evening is Professor Daleen Ajit Miller, who is an Associate Professor for Citizenship Studies at the Thabo Mbeki African School of Public and International Affairs. She's also a yogi, very specifically a Kundalini yogi. I don't know what that means, but if we do speak to tonight, I'll find out what that is. Her work emphasizes the importance of self-governance and movements that emanate out of self-governance. And this is like a community-based project, right? Such as food gardens as a counter for food insecurity in Africa, as a counter for the domination of large corporations, controlling food production and food security in Africa. And so obviously self-governance begins as it's a bottom-up approach. That is to say, it is communities taking charge of their own well-being and govern their own and determine their own destiny through how they govern themselves. She is the program director this evening. More importantly, she obtained her doctorate from the Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore in the United States, and she was the director of the South African chapter of the Institute of African Alternatives and the national educator for a large COSATU trade union. And she, more importantly, was part of a Codesria alternative executive member for Southern Africa and the founder of the Women's Academic Solidarity Association at Rhodes University. Professor Daleen Ajit Miller will be on the program this evening. She'll be speaking. Of course, as you know, it's not just the lecture today that's taking place and it's important, but it's also the festivities that happen around it. And there are various panel discussions in the days leading up to this, in the days after this, that form an important part of why this event and this, place is so important. The Thabo Mbeki the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, alongside its school, will bring various other lectures throughout the year. In fact, throughout May, relating to various matters on this, and has, very important people as part of it. The former Prime Minister of Ethiopia will be presenting a lecture on the national question around peace and democracy in Africa. Obviously, that is one that does not escape Africa. Professor Bani Pichana, who's the Vice Chancellor, and the principal of UNISA, will be presenting a lecture on the art of the philosopher king's leadership and their role in society. That's a lecture that I'm looking forward to listening in on and participating. Professor Dr. Phumzile Lamncuka, who's our former Deputy President, as well as the Executive Director of the United Nations Women, will also be presenting a lecture in the month on gender equality and women development for Africa's renewal. All of this can be found on the website of the Thabo Mbeki Africa Day lecture, and that's obviously on the website of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation. Do go check it out if you want to register or apply to participate in any of these lectures that will be coming out across the month. Give me that call, 011 714 2006 0614 104 107. Let's take a listen to some of your voice notes before we get into the hall when the program starts.
Must not stay in power until they get old, as we need to hear from what they are willing to do for Africa while they're still alive, not the ones who just want to die in positions like Uganda, like Congo Brazzaville, like Equatorial Guinea, and others who just want to cling on power instead of working for Africa. Because Africa cannot survive, cannot develop without leadership that is interested in the affairs of the people. So I think The lecture today will be very, very good and it outlined many problems that are facing Africa. As Africa is faced by many.
Stand by.
The program has started. Right now on stage is Professor Zbusiso Vilunkomo, who is the Executive Dean of the Thabo Mbeki African School of Public Affairs and International Relations at the University of South Africa, UNISA. There's a partnership, of course, between the Thabo Mbeki Foundation as well as the Thabo Mbeki School of Public Affairs and International Affairs with the University of South Africa, UNISA. And Professor Zbusiso Vilunkomo is on stage right now doing a brief overview of the Thabo Mbeki School. Shortly after him, President Thabo Mbeki will be on stage introducing the guest speaker for today, Professor Toyin Falola, who is going to deliver the keynote in today's address. Of course, we're coming to you live here from the Gallagher State. You can watch us live on YouTube. We're streaming live on the SAfm YouTube channel. You can also find us on safm.co.za, or we're just 104 to 107 nationwide on your radio, right? And you can find us over there as well. The stream, the video stream of it, if you'd like to watch, is on all our social media platforms. So Twitter, Facebook, as well as YouTube. You'll be able to watch it live over there. My name is Oliver Dickson, and I'm with you all the way up until the end of this program, which is at 8 p.m. this evening. Let's take a quick break. On the other side of this, we bring you what's on stage at the moment. Let's have a listen to some of your voice notes that's come through on the WhatsApp voice note line on 0614 104 107. As we line up those voice notes that have come through so long, we're also taking your calls on 011 2006. And do let us know, what do you think about the African question? Effectively, that question is more specifically related to the African Union. Is the African Union relevant still today to speak to the African condition? But more specifically, what is the African condition? Has the African Union achieved much since its inception 20 years ago? But more specifically, should it change how it operates? Should it change what it assigns itself to solve, such as peace and security on the continent? Again, so many countries we can speak about: Sudan, South Sudan, Angola. We can speak about Uganda. We can speak about Mozambique. We can speak about Zimbabwe. We can even begin to speak about South Africa. Yeah, we can and should begin to speak about South Africa. The xenophobia problem in this country is not unrelated to the question around peace and security. It's not unrelated to the question around immigration and mobility. The African question also relates to subsistence. Food security on the continent is an issue. There's lots to be done to ensure that food security is not monopolized in such a way that oligarchs have complete control over whether or not the production of food on the African continent takes place or does not at all, and where the pricing thereof gouges people outside of being able to afford that, but to ensure that African states help each other where there are things such as droughts, where there are things such as bad weather conditions, right? But more importantly, how are we also responding as a continent to the climate problem? Climate change has affected Africa severely. And this is a continent that has barely industrialized. How do we solve for that? What's the conversation we need to have around that? And is the African Union fit for purpose to be able to answer and speak to that condition? Send us those voice notes on the WhatsApp voice note line 0614 104 107. Give us a call 011 714 2006. Let's have a listen to some of your voice notes. We've got KGA. We've got KGA out in Northwest. KG, thank you so much for your call this evening. What's on your mind? Okay. Is it KGM? Is it KGM or KGA? We're still coming to you live from the Thabo Mbeki lecture out at the Gallagher Estate in Johannesburg for the annual Thabo Mbeki lecture. This year's guest speaker, keynote speaker, Professor Toyin Falola, will be addressing us very, very shortly. But let's take your calls. KGM out in Northwest, good evening. I'm fantastic, my brother. How are you? What's on your mind?
Well, look, let's talk the relevance and irrelevance of the African Union. You know, I was listening to President Mbeki the other day when he was trying to expand on this issue. In my humble view, if the mandate was being put into practice, I mean, if you give yourself time to just go through the data that they put out there, what they say they stand for, what they're gonna do. It looks good on paper. But I believe the African Union has become irrelevant because they never put what they say. They never practice what they preach. And
what do you mean by that? Can you point to an example?
Okay. Here's an issue. We've always been singing independence as a continent.
Right.
How often do we see our leaders going across the oceans? They go and beg for handouts. Even when we know that we are the wealthiest continent when it comes to minerals and even with food security.
But is that a problem, KGM? Is that a problem relating to the African Union, or rather just a problem relating to different nation states on the continent?
No, I think the African Union is there for a purpose. If you look at the objectives of what the African Union is all about, it should be spearheading, it should be forcing the mandate. So if we're going to have the African Union which becomes a toothless body, this is why I say if countries are going to do as they please, even though they are members of the African Union, then what's the point of having African Union?
Yeah.
If we have to be practical to say African Union has to enforce, I mean, look for instance at
in just 30 seconds, can you tell me what the alternative looks like?
The alternative is that we establish our own regional bodies. I know that we have the likes of SADC, ECOWAS, and so forth, but the regional bodies should not be led by politicians. They should be led by civil society, and that will culminate into a unified movement, which will not be controlled by the countries from across the ocean.
Okay, that's an interesting thought. KGM, thank you so much for your call. Appreciate it as usual. That's KGM out in Northwest. We're now switching over live to the lecture at the Thabo Mbeki Foundation here at the Gallagher Estate. You can stream the lecture live on YouTube on the SAfm YouTube page. We're also coming to you live on Facebook and Twitter, where you can also watch the lecture live again. We're on 104 to 107 FM nationwide, and you can also find us on SAfm.co.za. Let's switch over to the lecture.
Envisage utopia, but also they envisage transformations that we must be ourselves embedded in. You're welcome. Lea Amuhela. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Lenkabula. Can we all please stand for the national anthem? You may be seated. Thank you. What a beautiful anthem. And now I would like to hand over to our gentle but firm leader, the Executive Dean of the Thabo Mbeki African School of Public and International Affairs, Professor Sibusiso Villankomo. Prof. Nkomo has his own stellar background. He is one of those cum laude professors. We have to tell the people, Prof. It's not just anybody that was brought to the school, you know. He was a research professor in the Center for Advancement of Scholarship at the University of Pretoria. And one of the things I like on his CV is that he serves on the editorial board of the Servant Leadership Journal, published at Gonzaga University. Welcome, Prof.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson of this august occasion and great celebration. I want to say there comes a time in the history of a people where you ask yourselves, why do we have universities? Why do universities exist? Do they serve the purpose of a country, a continent, and the world? We have certainly come to try and want to answer that deep question. We deliberately sought to name our school the Thabo Mbeki African School of Public and International Affairs. We named it after a great son of South Africa, a great son of Africa, and a player in the world. An intellectual, a deep thinker, an economist, a diplomat, and a student of history. We were afraid that if this great son of Africa is gone unforgotten, all of the qualities which I've mentioned will also disappear. So the school has been spoken a lot about, and we've learned from him that transdisciplinarity is the way to go. Transdisciplinarity allows for a university to be able to groom and educate young people who can have a broad perspective to knowledge and a broad understanding of how developments must take place. So highly delighted that the name Thabo Mbeki has given us that opportunity to explore transdisciplinarity with our master's and PhD programs. We are convinced that without curriculum reform, you cannot go anywhere. You cannot continue with a curriculum which is colonially based only, but you must also expose your own thinking as an emerging country, as an emerging continent, and as a continent which is freeing itself from bondage or past history. But it doesn't mean that you negate what the rest of the world is also there to offer. You've got to also take that into consideration. The Thabo Mbeki African School of Public and International Affairs, which I'm going to refer to as the TM School, also pays attention to being a center of excellence. I want to cite Nyara Sudakasa, the late Nyara Sudakasa, who used to say, excellence must be the buzzword of an institution of higher learning. Because if you don't espouse excellence, you are actually going to produce mediocre students and non-competitive students. Our school is also committed to the reconstructing and the deconstructing of the study of public and international affairs. We've heard a lot about public administration. We've heard a lot about separate disciplines all over the place. But we are saying we want to bring together public and international affairs because they go together and they make a difference, and it makes sense why in other parts of the world they've established schools like the John F. Kennedy School of Government, they've established the Lyndon Johnson School of Public Affairs, and it makes sense that we should actually be competitive and also come up with a combination which is unique to this part of the world. I want to summarize by saying we're lucky as the TM School to have outstanding individuals associated with us. and one of them is going to be the keynote speaker tonight, Professor Toyini Falola, who has distinguished himself as a professor, Professor Fumni Olonishikin, Dan Rich, Deborah Sanders, Mashupe Maseremole, and also we have the opportunity of hearing officials, former ambassadors, and former members of multilateral entities making a contribution to our thinking processes as we create this school, which we say it shall not be second to none. Finally, I must share with you that we have had the luck of attracting some of the best minds so far in the academic world. Hopefully, in a few days, we will release a newsletter on them and the names of our distinguished board of advisors, chaired or led by Professor Falola. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Prof. We have a little AV soundbite for you. Wow. So those were our 12 talks that we've had at UNISA. The inaugural Africa Day lecture was given by our very own esteemed patron and chancellor, Thabo Mbeki, who was instrumental in the formation of the African Union. He gave us the ideological fuel for this vision in the program of the African Renaissance. And tonight, it is time for us to reflect. So we call on Thabo Mbeki to introduce this phenomenal human being we have here for you today to help us with this reflection. Welcome, Tata.
Do we need this thing?
Yes, we do.
I don't think we do. This one is working. Okay. It's okay, leave it.
All right.
Thanks a lot, Program Director. I suppose all of us have seen this program. And if you've read it, you will see that it says, I must speak for 30 minutes. Now, I decided that was not enough. So I'll speak for 40. But thanks a lot, Program Director. I'm very, very glad indeed that we have Professor Falola as our lecturer this year. I will say something about him just now. when we asked the African Union for permission to host, we asked the African Union for permission to host what was then the Organization of African Unity. And we said we would like to host the summit of the OAU in the year 2002. Normally you ask for that permission 2-3 years ahead of time. And the OAU agreed. The reason for it was that it was the 90th anniversary of the ANC. So we thought it would be important that on that anniversary, the continent should join us here in South Africa to celebrate that particular birthday. It really to reaffirm the very nature of the African National Congress as a Pan-African organization. And so it happened that as we waited for the OAU to come to South Africa, it changed into the African Union. And that's how we became the host. And of course, that generated high expectations, the formation of the African Union. Because it did seem at the time that with the liberation of South Africa in 1994, at last the summit, the Organization of African Unity, which became the AU, would attend to this other particular matter of the reconstruction of our continent. Because indeed, ever since the OAU had been formed in 1963, its real binding matter was the struggle for the liberation of our continent. And I'm saying that with the liberation of South Africa, it looked like the time had come that the OAU, which became the AU, must attend to this matter of the eradication of poverty, eradication of underdevelopment, development of our continent, replacing it in the context of the rest of the world in a particular place of honor. And therefore, a lot of excitement when the African Union was formed, with the vision that indeed it must be more interventionist, for instance, capable of intervening in any African country, member state, if crimes against the people were being committed, like genocide and crimes against humanity, unlike the OAU. So we're very, very pleased indeed to host the formation, the launch of the African Union here in South Africa at the Kings Park Stadium in Durban. So obviously it was clear to us that therefore when the AU celebrates its 20th anniversary this year, it would be important that the Africa Day lecture should address that matter. To say, where are we? Where are we with regard to meeting all of the things that we promised ourselves 20 years ago? It's a challenging topic, and it seemed to us that we needed a particularly skilled person to address this subject. To say the positive things, to say the negative things, but in the end, to say maybe, to enable us to say, well, this is where we were 20 years ago, this is where we are now, and where do we want to be in 20 years' time? Which I think is very important for our continent. Because all of us know as we're starting from this country, we can see the challenges, major challenges that face us as Africans. Now, Professor Falola, as has been said, is many extraordinary things. He's a celebrated author, editor of books, writer, poet, academic leader, organizer, teacher, Pan-Africanist. What else, Professor Falola, should I say? Author and editor of over 160 books on Africa and African diaspora. One of Africa's preeminent historians, indeed one of the major intellectuals of our time. There is an annual international conference that's named after him, as the Toyin Falola Annual Conference on Africa and African Diaspora, which meets every July in a major African university. The Association of Third World Studies has named its annual Best Book Award after him as the Toyin Falola Prize for the best book in Africa, on Africa. As has been indicated by Professor Vilnkomo, Toyin Falola has done us a great honor of serving as the chair of the International Advisory Board of our African School on Public and International Affairs, to bring all of that experience and knowledge to the building of this particular school so that it must be as excellent as he is. Apart from being a professor at the University of Texas in Austin, of course, honorary professor at the University of Cape Town, extraordinary professor of human rights at the Free State University. And therefore, even as South Africans, we are very proud and honored indeed that he interacts with us to bring to us this enormous volume of knowledge and wisdom and capacity, which surely must inspire us, as I was saying, to be as excellent as he is. Very proud, therefore, even when we asked him and said, Professor Falola, can you please talk to us about the AU at 20? He didn't hesitate. He immediately agreed to do that. Thank you very much, Professor Falola. Welcome. And I'm sure all of us are ready to listen to you. Thanks a lot.
And now, can we welcome our Nigerian professor in an African way and ululate?
Sound like this. His Excellency President Mbeki, the Vice Chancellor, Professor Lenkabula, I stand on all existing protocol. It's a pleasure for me to be here today. I'm one of you. As many of my friends who are here know, I come here a lot. I want to start with a proverb. A heavy basket cannot be lifted to the head with one hand. It's a Yoruba adage. with the meaning that one can only boast of a collective and cooperative front because an individual effort makes one susceptible to attacks and challenges. In English, you say united we stand, divided we fall. There are many variants of this adage, but the point is that collective effort leads to greater success, and this is the foundation of the African Union that we are gathered here today to celebrate 20 years of its existence. It's an evidence of a paradigm shift in continental ideology. The African dream took on a more profound continental hope and shape when African countries came together to plan on how to achieve independence across all sectors of African life and development. Before this, as President Mbeki reminded you, the Organization of African Unity attempted to promote unity and economic independence by upholding unique African social attributes and economic progress among all members. The history of the African Union is well known to many of you in this audience, and its problems are also well known. The swing shifted in 2001 when the OAU took decisive steps to refocus its objectives and structures to accommodate contemporary matters affecting us, as well as a renewal of developmental strategies to match our realities. The African Union was founded in 2002, following a 2-year process of thorough analysis of the former entity. It was a vigorous, robust conversation. The papers are available, the debates are important, and they represent major documents of the era. Since then, the AU has taken on a new duty, different from achieving independence from European colonial rule, and it has tried to focus more on preserving democratic principles. In this transition, and at this moment, we have to pay tribute to some of our ancestors who initiated many of these ideas as way back as the 19th century. Ancestors such as William Biden, Marcus Garvey, W.E.B. Du Bois, arguably the most preeminent intellectual of the last century, Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere, and our own Thabo Mbeki, a visionary leader. Permit me to devote a few minutes on Thabo Mbeki himself. When scholars or individuals talk about the heroes of Africa and the most important players in the continent's transformation, they emphasize the contributions and achievements of early Pan-Africanists who fought for independence during the rebirth of the continent's cultural identity. However, as much as Africa's needs remain, and some people champion meeting those needs and carving new transformative blueprints for the continent, the valor of African heroes continues even in recent times. The contributions of great minds like President Mbeki to the progress of Africa have given flesh to my assertion. President Mbeki's contributions to reforming African dreams by supporting the creation of the African Union is the commencement of new African dreams, and we cannot overstate it, and we must praise it as a landmark. The existence of philosophy and ideology formed towards the development of the continent was one of the qualities of this visionary leader and nationalist. Thabo Mbeki was one of those philosophical leaders who had a conviction about what Africa and its future should look like. He refused to be among those agitated by words alone. Instead, he cherished ideologies with notable actions that have made him a celebrated African visionary leader. President Mbeki believed in an African renaissance and held to that ambition to develop the continent. His speech to the South African Constitutional Assembly on May 8, 1996, titled "I'm an African," made people understand his renaissance ambition for the continent. President Mbeki believed that there was a need to restructure the core agitations of the continent towards a renaissance that is socially imperative, that could be the only leeway to change, transformation, and the recovery of an African identity. President Mbeki, we cannot thank you enough. His views have been a clarion call for Africans and African leaders to wake up to reality and explore the advantages and benefits of globalization and transformative paradigm shifts in the cultural evaluation of Africa. While many will aim at achieving political independence of the continent, as seen from the early Pan-Africanist movements, President Mbeki's visions were more targeted towards the economic independence of the continent and a more pragmatic approach to solving current and evolving problems. These perspectives have been claimed to favor the aggrandizement of Africa's economic, social, and cultural status. He built on the ideas of Blyden, he built on the ideas of Du Bois, he built on the ideas of Nkrumah, and he shifted many of these ideas to economic paradigms. That shift, Thabo Mbeki School, you have to study them more robustly. The Renaissance is built on Africans' innate attributes, as Mbeki argues, which have been seen in our past history, like the architecture, arts, creativity of African cultures, Nok civilization, and Egyptian innovations, among others. However, the ideas were open to foreign aims in order for Africa not to be self-destructive, considering the necessity of intercontinental cooperation. This reflects in President Mbeki's notable activities regarding the creation of NEPAD, and I was instrumental in getting the G8 countries to fund the agency. We cannot thank him enough. Mbeki's visions have been labeled neo-Pan-Africanist and argued by different scholars, including myself, to be partly off the grid of Pan-Africanism. However, one thing is certain about his ambitions for Africa and Africans. The core principles of Pan-Africanism are not in any way thrown to the wind by him, but are quite developed to take the visions of contemporariness and build a continent for the future. In fact, in his famous quote, "I'm an African" address, President Mbeki affirmed, probably unknowingly to him at that time, that his ideas were based on Africans and African values, and that African personality and Africanism are the bedrock of his Renaissance ideas. All these visions, his expectations, and how far the African Union has come could also be seen and appreciated in his address during the 10th anniversary of the African Union. With President Mbeki's spirit and conviction, coupled with the visions of other African leaders, there was an agreement on the need to rebut the continent's mission and goals and prepare it for the future. He and other leaders saw the need to link the OAU's long fights with our current and future needs of the continent. And this could be seen as a summary of the idea behind the proposal and adoption of the formation of the African Union. The African Union objectives and achievements build on many of the achievements of the Organization of African Unity, the need to modify the limitations of the OAU, the need to go beyond the failures of the OAU, the need to draw development issues into the platform of the OAU, the need to intervene more effectively in conflict areas. And the African Union set out as a symbol of hope for the renewed aspirations of Pan-Africanism, fusing previous ideas of many of our ancestors with some of the ideas of President Mbeki that I've outlined. To define the mission of the Union, it developed some 14 objectives for itself. This included guiding principles that will be material to the realization of these objectives. The renewed duties of the Union had the development of Africa and its member states as the core, the creation of an African economic community, ensuring good and uninterrupted governance, promotion of justice, promotion of equality, as well as development across health and other important sectors. One of the major characteristics of the new objectives was the absence of attention to the decolonization of the continent, in contrast with the agenda of the OAU. Many of you have doubted the success and performance of the African Union. I hope to convince you this evening that it has achieved a lot. It has actually achieved tremendously. And I'm not talking from reviews of policy papers. I'm also talking from experience as someone who has been involved with many of his activities, most especially in the area of higher education. Many of you may not know that the African Union has established universities. It was a privilege for me to be at the convocation ceremony at the University of Ibadan, where they receive higher degrees. And we have redefined the issues around research grants to make it more relevant, to assess its impact, and we have reviewed the linkages with external colleagues and Africans abroad. Many of you may not know that it was very deliberative to redefine the number of African regions from 5 to move it to 6, in which the entire body of African diaspora, we now categorize them as Africa's 6th region. And to those of us who write books and textbooks, we are doing the linkages. We are trying to say we should not make a distinction between home and abroad and fuse them together. Many of you may not be aware that the African Union has insisted on the creation of African 6th region in all presidential offices. They've created the African Bond, and they have created linkages between those at home and those abroad. I am happy to be part of that great initiative. It's a symbol of hope, and the objectives have made the African Union preoccupied with the development of its member states. It has prioritized issues of economic interests more than ever before, with solid documents on intergroup relations, intergroup trade, Africa Free Zone, ideas about developing an African currency. It has launched an African Union passport, and when it's in due operation, I'm pleading to all of you to apply, because you can use it to travel to all the countries in Africa. And we are thinking, and some are thinking, in terms of reducing the number of customs and immigrations that you have to pass through. When this is in full operation, you can just get up and go to any African countries and just enter effortlessly. Many of these initiatives are not known because of the way communication works. There are ideas on sustainable development, the adoption of the principle of sovereignty, the adoption of the principles of maintaining peace, the adoption of the principles of quickly resolving conflicts. The African Union inherited the globalization attempts of the OAU and related challenges, including the risk of marginalization and separation within the continent. Decisions have been taken with respect to globalization, and in recent time, the conversation has been about the revival of the non-alignment movement. This is the area where there's a lot of discussion, driven by the current crisis in Ukraine. Should we revive the non-aligned movement? Seeing the new mission of the African Union and the expectations of Africans of what it can offer, it is important to ask if the African Union has been fulfilling its objectives. It's 20 years old this month, and that is about half of the life of its predecessor, the OAU. Is it on a course to actualize its mission? What are its challenges? If economic growth has been one of its most important objectives, how far has this been achieved? The economic growth pattern of the continent could be attributed to many factors, part of which will include an open trade system, foreign direct investment towards encouraging the growth of African economies. However, one of the most successful and progressive economic efforts was the embrace of industrialization, the recognition of the importance of the fourth industrial revolution, and attention given to the use of technology, the promotion of the internet, and focus on building human capacity. To encourage continuous growth, the African Union introduced the African Continental Free Trade Area, designed to affect 1.2 billion Africans with a gross domestic product of 2.5 trillion, and is anticipated to be the biggest free trade area globally. That document has been prepared. In achieving better economic growth for the continent, the Union has been in partnership with many countries, sub-regional organizations, and to fulfill its commission towards maintaining peace and defending African citizens, the AU shifted to a strategic policy of promoting peace. In 2003, the AU took interest in the 4 conflicts of Sudan. It was active in ending the conflict, and President Mbeki was part of that initiative. You already know the story of Sudan. Based on this agreement, the U.S. also created the Army's mission in Sudan, and its great involvement prevented the loss of millions of lives. In Libya, the AU took reasonable steps in the conflicts involving the government of Gaddafi. And that conflict became complicated when foreign countries threw themselves into the situation. Many of you are also familiar with the opposition of the AU to that foreign intervention. So another example was the creation in 2007 of the African Union mission in Somalia to resolve the Somali crisis. And the intervention of the African Union reduced the death of thousands of lives. The adoption of the African Union's Constitutive Act was proof of the renewed commitment to the protection of human rights and the promotion of value for the dignity of human persons as a value. The AU has been able to build on the foundation for the general protection of human rights on the continent. The Maputo Summit of the African Union witnessed the redefinition of the African commitment to women's rights. I've seen in this hall 2 people who are part of this initiative. Adopting the Maputo Protocol on African women's rights has been a commendable step that showcases the commitment to women's rights. Today, the participation of women in African politics keeps increasing. We need more, but we've produced women as presidents, including the current president of Tanzania. Promoting democracy, human rights, and good governance, these are part of the focus of the Union. We've created the Charter on Democracy, on government, on elections, and a Department of Political Affairs with a commissioner who monitors many of these activities. I've said all this just to mention some major contributions. But we have challenges, we have failures, and disappointment that I will talk about. When the African Union was instituted in 2001, it was a conviction that there would finally be an answer to all the problems that militated against the continent, and where it did not resolve them immediately. The ambition was big, the expectations were many. It was expected that the spirit of Pan-Africanism would permeate all aspects of our politics and development. A different dimension in intra-African affairs and relationships between member states, especially in their internal affairs, was expected to broaden the scope of human rights, deserving development, and sustainable economic edification. Despite all the promises, achievements, and actions of the African Union, the important question is whether the AU has been able to fulfill the purpose for which it was created. What are the loose ends? As I stand before you today, we have problems that we worry about. We worry about the coups coming back to Africa. We worry about state capture in Nigeria and South Africa. We worry about implosion in the Sahel. We worry about issues of migrations. We worry about issues of the high rate of unemployment. And we worry about our youth who want to leave the continent, taking difficult decisions, crossing the long Sahara Desert. We worry about, many of you in this audience worry about. And the search for more express and evident unity of Africa, which has been the purpose of the OAU and the purpose of the AU, we also worry about all those. The understanding that informed the agitation for African progress regarding integration, regarding regionalism, we worry about all those. What I'm trying to say is that there's nothing that you worry about that they do not worry about in the AU. There's no problem in the African nation states that those who work as commissioners in the commission, the civil, hardworking civil servants who work there, there is no issue that they are not aware or they do not care about. They call for progress. They call for good institutions. They call for good leadership. And the institutionalization of the African peer review mechanism, which has met in South Africa several times, and the new Partnership for Africa's Development, NEPAD, both have allowed for action towards uniform adoption of standards, practices, and policies targeted at sustainable development and growth in all areas of African society. There's so many conversations on the issues of development. The AU has hoped that a major increase in the chances of developing African states through strategic efforts will positively impact all Africans. The view is that development is meant to occur and maximally impact and change our people's economic and social progress. The AU is aware of the poverty rate of Africans, and its figure as of 2019 that about 34% of Africans still live below $1.9 per day poverty line. That 59% fall below the $3 per day, and 80% live below $5 per day. All these figures, the AU has collected them, and so many worries have been expressed. The estimated number of Africans living in extreme poverty has been put at 478 million. That is a large number. And as a result of the global commercial and economic shutdown caused by COVID-19 epidemic, this figure climbed to 490 million Africans living below $2 per day. From 2000 to 2020, there was a small decrease in the number of poor people in Africa, thanks to the efforts of respective nations and the union. But the impact of COVID and currently the impact of the war in Ukraine is causing some major concern. The AU is aware of the falling standard of living of Africans in relation to development. It's aware of limited infrastructural development in almost all African countries. It's aware of the challenges of the limitations of job. Conversations have been held on how to diversify the economy. With strategies from African countries, in partnership with the African Union, there are conversations in 10 countries to further develop their growing economies. There are efforts to use as linchpin the economies of Nigeria, Ghana, Tanzania, Mozambique, Zambia, and Ethiopia to impact on the economies of other countries. The AU has a blueprint on development of roads, access to motorable and good roads, which is about 34% as against the international standard of 50%. You may wonder, am I talking about documents? Yes, there are great documents. And am I talking about some activities? Yes, there are activities. Are these activities enough? No, they are not enough. Despite the efforts of the African Union, it seems that there are examples to substantiate an argument for the trending reversal of democracy in Africa. You and I are worried about this democratic recession. This recession undermines the efforts of the AU and casts doubts on the fulfillment of the reason behind its creation. You are right to express your doubts. Aside from the efforts of the AU in the promotion and protection of democratic government, there are numerous other attempts to keep the democratic promise of the African Union. And one of the most promising was the adoption of the Charter of Democracy. Can the OAU manage the democratic recession? Can the AU prevent the comeback of the military? We cannot approve and disapprove simultaneously some of these activities. The AU has essentially not been stable in many of its commitments to promoting democracy in Africa, and its inconsistency has opened the Union to legitimate criticism. In issues around elections, in issues around coups, legitimate criticisms have been offered. Despite the Union's efforts to make the continent grow economically and promote democracy, there have been about 40 attempted coups since 2010 and about 12 successful coups that removed elected government and replaced them with military rule. The predominance of military coups, although caused by frustrating situations of individual countries, has been a major challenge to the commitment of the AU against any assault on elected government and issues around political stability in Africa. If you have cause to worry, I will join you in that worry. The situation has deteriorated to the point that we now ask if coups are returning to Africa and whether the African Union has failed in its promise to safeguard democracy. Some of us have suggested the need to rethink the representations in all the regional bodies in the African Union, because representations are based on recommendations by presidents of countries, by politicians in countries. In our study of the ECOWAS, we realized that it is the politicians that sponsor their friends to represent their countries in ECOWAS. And when major decisions occur, they do not decide as we expect, simply because they are playing the politics of those who put them there. Some of us are beginning to suggest that our representatives in the African Union should be people like you, and should include people like you and I, who will not be connected to the politicians in our respective countries. While the AU can make declarations, adopt protocols, offer statements on its position against or for a particular action, one of the consistent problems associated with the Union is the difficulty in enforcing its decisions and actions. And on this, all international organizations, whether it's the African Union or the EU, suffer from this problem. To strengthen its enforcement and protection of human rights, the AU established the African Court on Human and People's Rights in 2004. It's an impressive document, and people are challenging the AU to move more aggressively towards its implementation. In respect to the commitment of the AU to the position on election, the principle of responsibility to protect the security challenges and instabilities in some countries, many are suggesting a revision of many of its policy papers. Nigeria, Kenya, Mali, Chad, Central African Republic, Mozambique, Somalia, and many others have been at the receiving end of radical Islamist bombardment and victimization. Islamic extremism in Nigeria and Kenya has become more damaging. Since 2009, the Boko Haram group in Nigeria has been responsible for over 40,000 deaths, displacement of 3 million people, attacks on countless citizens. Many are calling on the AU for its intervention. So there are challenges in the area of terrorism and politics that we have to worry about. Regarding sustainable development, which is one of the core principles of the AU, the standard of measurement for the progress of every society and government is the extent of its development. First, we battle with the debacles of underdevelopment in almost all sectors of our economy. Second, we are beginning to see a major rise in external debts, and some countries are now using a percentage of their annual revenues to finance their debts, including South Africa. We're witnessing the impact of globalization in ways that we cannot fully control. In order to reduce poverty rate in the continent, we have to harness our resources. As everyone will attest, our economic history shows the continent is dependent on agricultural resources and practices, and we must not go too far in the search for other sustainable resources. Agricultural development is a stimulator for ensuring multidimensional development that touches almost all aspects of society. It spreads to food security, elevation of poverty, economic development, infrastructural development, and many more. And many people are suggesting that the AU, in partnership with the African Agricultural Development Bank, various countries must pay more attention to agriculture. To boost the African economy, we need to focus on incorporating resources and raw materials production, which we have to use internally instead of exporting them. And while other nations make deliberate attempts towards sustainable development in their respective countries, the African environment must be treated with unique consideration. Our dream of a united front toward African cultural sustenance and development is a core duty of the AU as an appropriate body to achieve these desires. At its inception, the AU inherited a Pan-African orientation that builds a collective approach to worldviews and economic development. The issue of sustainable development must remain at the core of what the AU will continue to promote and do. One major impediment is the recurrent political instability and security challenges faced by many of our countries. The continuous subversion of political institutions, terrorist attacks, will not allow the AU and African countries to focus on the development of Africa across all sectors. And a new security challenge has opened up in internet and a wide range of cyber security. And we have to pay attention to what to do with emerging threat from cyber attacks. Many of you have heard about the Agenda 2063. And this Agenda 2063, I want to talk about because it now constitutes the overarching core of the program of the AU. For the past 20 years, the African Union has recorded commendable achievements. It has failed noticeably in many areas. It has battled recurrent and momentary challenges. The Union has gone through transformational processes that have been able to make it adjust its orientation towards the current needs of the continent. While we might be concerned about the past and current actions of the AU, we must always be ready to draw back and ask if the AU has a plan for the future. Unsurprisingly, the African Union has been able to reel out plans covering the continent's current and future challenges. The Agenda 2063 is one of such futuristic agreements and subscriptions that the African nations have decided to execute. There's a consensus around Agenda 2063. In recognition of the need to salvage the African society from continued problems of underdevelopment and ensure social and economic growth, the African leaders and the African Union realized that there was a need to build a sustainable plan that will be inspired by Pan-African values, which is inclusive towards all African countries. Upon this realization, the Agenda 2063, which projects forward 50 years of deliberate and coordinated plans towards African development and a definitive voice in the international community, had to be built. The Agenda 2063 is a source of solutions that will be drawn from Africa itself and allow the continent to take lessons from the achievements and failures of the past. The plan is intended to provide enough opportunities over 50 years to positively influence the socio-economic development of the continent by 2063. If you have not seen the document, please try to look for it. It is ambitious, it's expansive. It's built upon 3 principles: prosperity, unity, and peace, to be enjoyed by all Africans without reservation. It's divided into the short span, the medium, and the long-term goals, 10 years, 25, and 50 years. At the Golden Jubilee celebration of the OAU in 2013, the Agenda 2063 project was aimed at resuscitating and attaining the full African identity, eradicating every form of colonialism in contemporary society, promoting good governance and democracy, including security assurance, despite the present bottlenecks. The AU and African leadership intend to reach this goal through a continuous partnership with other international bodies and organizations and African countries to arrive at a sustainable approach for intentional management of such long-term projects in the right trajectory. The Union's implementation plan included the reliance on the youth, who are the most appropriate beneficiaries of this project, the women who are currently marginalized, and likewise Africans in diaspora, for the assurance of sustainable monitoring of the agenda's implementation. The African Union has been deliberate in seeing to the success of this agenda by departmentalizing it into 3. The strategic plan that consists of the objectives and aspirations of the Union for Africa by 2063, the implementation plan to ensure the actualization of those plans, a monitoring and evaluation framework to consistently check the progress and delay in the plans, in addition to providing right solutions through feedbacks. South Africa is involved in monitoring this agenda, and our colleagues at the University of Free State have contributed in monitoring these contributions through conferences to which have been invited and to which we will continue to monitor the progress of Agenda 2063. While the African Agenda 2063 is important and commendable, many factors will have to be implemented to ensure that the plan does not change, extended, or disposed of before or after the time frame. The AU must learn to ensure that the implementation and monitoring institutions of the project are well equipped across this time, and its operation must be inclusive of all the African societies and cultures. This is to ensure that the plan does not fail as a result of a lack of implementation and monitoring institutions. The AU must ensure that it achieves a common understanding of the agenda across all its member states to ensure uniformity of purpose and development. To achieve this, the Union must increase its efforts towards achieving unity among African states, ensuring full cooperation of all countries and stakeholders. More so, for this plan to succeed, it must be powered by a prepared and understanding human force. And in order to achieve such a prolonged continental project, it is important that the African Union must intensify its agitation for basic education and encourage meaningful investment in science and technology to prepare the population for and ahead of the 2063 realization deadline. More so, it is important to enhance and recommend the embrace of continuous research in all our universities, in all fields, to increase the possibility of innovative breakthroughs that will aid the actualization of this vision. And in giving its new grants, the AU is insisting on research that is connected to this agenda. You and I must treat this agenda in respect of each specific country based on their specific and special needs. A general approach towards development may result in unanticipated marginalization that will see progressive execution in some parts and failure in others. Thus, a deliberate effort must be made to ensure that each country is carried along with its counterparts, and that there should be a quick reaction to any incident that may impede the actualization of the project in each country. This means that all sectors, all organs, all institutions, all commissions of the African Union must be focused consciously on the actualization of this project. The AU and its other institutions and programs that have developed over the years have endeavored to ensure progressive cooperation among African countries. To achieve this, it is believed that Africa must be taken collectively with reasonable immigration and trade policies that will allow the free flow of human and material resources within our continent. This aligns with the early Pan-African ideologies that view Africa as one body, protecting and promoting a common identity. Aside from this ideology, individuals have found the need to migrate and extend commercial activities outside their immediate societies, either temporarily or permanently in human history. And this phenomenon is not going to stop anytime soon. International migration in Africa has to be connected to issues of development, of growth, and cooperation dreams of the continent. However, as you and I know, we are dealing with xenophobic attacks in different parts of the continent, and the problem might not have attracted the attention of the world or academia, but it's a major threat to continental cooperation. Xenophobia and Afrophobia, linked with misconstrued nationalism and ethnocentrism, have never been good for our development hopes. This problem must be addressed by the AU and reaffirm the commitment of member states to ensuring that such acts are not tolerated. The Union must be assertive with its stance against xenophobia, ensure community education, embark on projects that will ensure high circulation of job opportunities, no matter the origin of any individual. Xenophobia, Afrophobia, and their respective attacks are threats to African unity and a step towards killing the ambition of people who dream about beautiful African future. Have devoted this lecture to the unity of states and countries as the embodiment of the African Union. In doing this, we have limited the scope of our conversation, and it is time that you and I begin to talk about the unity of culture, the African taste of food, our commonality in music, our interest in films. Our people are united. If you are from West Africa, you see the massive migrations of Yoruba people to Gambia. If you visit Nairobi, you see trucks carrying food from Tanzania and Uganda. We do not speak about the unity of culture. We do not speak about the unity of our people. We do not have data on marriages. We do not have data on our people. We do not have data on interactions using religion, how people from South Africa, from Tanzania, go to churches in Nigeria, how Nigerian pastors operate in Kenya. We do not talk about that. And it is time you and I begin to extend our research into the unity among our people and how the use of languages, the use of idioms, the commonalities of our ideas make us who we are. We do not talk about that, but it's very extensive. Neither do we talk about the extensive migration within Africa. We talk about the flow of migration from Africa to the West, but you may not know that more people migrate within Africa itself. I once served on the Commission of Afro-Arab Summit under Mubarak. And Mrs. Mubarak was a good host, supplying us with data. 2 million people move within that region every year. That's far more than Africans who leave Africa. We do not talk about that. The director of the program, the vice chancellor, members of the audience, let me close this lecture. And in closing it, I want to return to a statement made in 2002 by President Thabo Mbeki. And I want to quote him. We must act together to build a brighter future. Working together with all of us, governments, parliamentarians, trade unions, private sector, civil society, religious communities, cultural workers, for a better future for the peoples of Africa. And I want to throw challenges using this quotation. And the first challenge will go to Professor Fi Nkomo, who has been given the leadership opportunity to lead the Team Ali School. In her disappointments, in the limitations of Africa, one of the agendas of the Team Ali School is to give us solutions to this problem. Professor V. Nkomo, we expect a lot from you. And we have seen the agenda of the school covering areas of international affairs, governance, citizenship, development, leadership thought. And we believe that the results of research coming from your school will transform this continent. My second challenge is to our youth, that you have a mandate, a great mandate, to build on our inheritances. My generation may have disappointed us, may have disappointed you. Forgive us and correct our mistakes. We've heard you clearly, and we understand that we may have failed you, but you have to move forward without us. And in moving forward, you have to do better than us and spend more time thinking about transformation than about our failure. Ladies and gentlemen, Africa will be defined by success. The success of our humanity, which nobody can take away from us. The success of our humility, which is well known. The success of our resilience. We survived the Atlantic slave trade. We are still here. We survived genocide. We are still here. We survived imperialism. We are still here. We survived colonization. We are still here. We survived poverty. We are still here. We survived COVID. We are still here. There is nothing we are not going to survive. The success of our endurance. Nobody is celebrating agonies and poverty. but we overcome. The success of our hope, which no one can take away from us. The success of our enormous capacity to turn our pain into our gains. And our gains will multiply and multiply, overcoming our pains. Thank you.
And that was the keynote address, the lecture by Professor Toyin Falula at the annual Thabo Mbeki lecture this year, focusing on the African Union at 20. So many reflections that stood out for me. What stood out for me, by and large, in the lecture was Professor Falula's reflection on the security crisis in across the African continent, speaking specifically to radical Islamist extremism bombarding various parts of the country, Ethiopia, Somalia, Eritrea, Kenya. We, of course, remember the Al-Shabaab bombing of Westgate Mall. But more specifically, and these numbers were shocking to me, Boko Haram having displaced 3 million people and having killed 40,000 people. Of course, there is the conflict going on in Ethiopia in the Tigray region at the moment that poses a food security crisis to more than 5 million people. Prof. Falola, of course, also reflecting on food security and the economy of Africa, specifically saying that Africa must harness its resources, specifically its agricultural resources and practices, to combat food poverty and food insecurity linked to sustainable development. He then says, in relation to our security crisis, that the crisis is not just extremist in nature and not just militaristic in nature. It is also about cybersecurity and the threats that it poses to Africa. But important questions Professor Falula asks is, has the African Union failed in its promise to safeguard democracy? Can the African Union combat this democratic recession? It's the first time I've ever heard of that term, combat the democratic recession in Africa. I didn't even know democracy can be in recession. But I mean, if you've had 14 attempted coups and 12 having been successful on the continent, there surely is a recession of democracy. But where he started the lecture, and critically important, was about the knowledge production culture and machinery on the African continent. In its introduction, President Thabo Mbeki also reflected on that. And you know, no one more suited to speak to me specifically related to that than the Vice Chancellor of UNISA, Professor Puleng Lenkabula. Prof, good evening. Thank you so much for joining me here at our little cold studio right outside the auditorium. Has Africa taken charge of its knowledge production machinery, and have we shifted the culture in what we deem to be appropriate epistemology for Africa? You know, we always speak African problems, African solutions for African problems, but have we done so really?
Yeah, thank you very much, Oliver, and the audience. I want to congratulate UNISA and the Thabo Mbeki Foundation for the Africa Lecture, especially an august doyen of knowledge, Professor Falole, for being the lecture, for giving the lecture tonight. Yes, you're right. Professor Falola and President Mbeki, our Chancellor, focused on the idea of knowledge production, civilizations of Africa, as well as the transformations that Africa would have contributed to humanizing the global arena as important pivot points for us. But for me, this is a contribution that UNISA has made. In the world, in 1873, there had not been any university that used the open distance modality. In the later years, UNISA ensured that this open distance modality that we're now using in the aftermath of COVID-19 becomes the invention that the global arena is taking now. That's not known. People know this
I'm a
from
student
other
of UNISA, and I didn't know that you had centers
Yes.
out in Eritrea and
Yes.
East Africa.
Yes. And so I think we as Africans have oftentimes undermined, disadvantaged, and sometimes nominalized the contributions of Africa into the global knowledge arena, but also into the humanizing agenda that has often not been aspects of Western colonial knowledge systems. And if you take into consideration the issues of coloniality that Professor Falola talked about, the issues of agitation, of freedom, of knowledge, of education, of humanizing epistemologies, become important points. And I'm happy that
it's also
as a
about
UNISA
resource. It's
student-
also about resource allocation. Are we allocating the right resources to be able to cultivate knowledge production? It speaks to the African condition.
Definitely. How many students in the continent or even in South Africa are supported by the taxes of the poor in order that they have access and success to higher education?
Right.
The whole NEFSA's financing scheme is just one example of how a state can expand access for higher education. And we need, though, not to make it a contribution that people promotes dependency, but it must be understood as that commitment that society makes around the imperative of knowledge, of education, especially university education, because university education is not just about knowledge information, but it's about research, innovation, forming intellectuals who are conscientious about their contribution to society. And that's an important aspect that Professor Falola was reminding us. We don't just remember what we studied, but we translate it into products, processes, and systems, including democratic dividends.
Yeah. We've got 1 minute left, and I want to ask you this in the last minute we have. Professor Falola says that in the 20 years that has been the African Union, there's been commendable achievements, but the Union has also failed noticeably. Is that a fair observation?
It is a fair observation because the good work in terms of promoting the democratic dividend has to be asserted. But the failure is attested to the coup d'etats that we've witnessed in the continent, 14 successful, as he cited, attempted 40, terrorism, the undermining of the role of women, the marginalization of those whose ideas may not be in the mainstream are also sites of interest for any researcher in Africa or even in their diaspora. You've put me off. Thank you.
Prof. Lengabule, there's a lot you and I need to speak about unrelated to this. Please do come visit me at the SAfm studios. Thank you so much for your time. Really, really do appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate that SAfm is a partner to envisioning and reclaiming Africa's futures through the Africa Lecture. Congratulations.
It's a pleasure. And thank you to you for listening. Thank you for your engagements. Thank you for indulging us. Do tweet me. It is at Oliver_speaking. You can also find me at SAfm Radio across all platforms on social media. And you and I can engage there. It's been a fantastic show, a beautiful lecture today. Thank you so much to the good people at UNISA, the good people at the Thabo Mbeki School of International Affairs, and the good people at the Thabo Mbeki Foundation. Thank you from me, Oliver Dickson. It's time for your news.
Independent and impartial. This is SAfm News.
Education Department under fire over tablet contract and suspects to appear in court over murder of suspected drug dealers. Good evening. The Eastern Cape Department of Education